say that's very interesting, because of course we know that the level of engagement of employees has a lot to do with the quality of the boss. How is this linked to, you mentioned positive reinforcement, positive feedback, nonverbal, verbal communication. How is that related to emotional intelligence? I mean, how does that play out?
Yeah, the concept of social and emotional intelligence is a complicated phrase, and we can conceptualize this label today in many different ways, and as a result there's a plethora or a variety of different constructs that we would identify with what do you mean when you use this label of emotional intelligence. But as a result, and simply, we believe it is a function of insight about one's skills, insight and awareness about one's emotions, the ability to regulate those emotions, to manage your behavior, particularly under crisis and challenge and stress, and the ability to read the impact of the work that you do. And I'll use a metaphor out of some volunteer work that my wife and I have been involved in for 20 years, is we are involved in raising guide dogs or service dogs for the blind. And I use this metaphor in the coaching work and teaching work and consulting work that I do, that all of us as leaders from time to time, we could use our own guide dog to illuminate our strengths so we can amplify those and leverage what we do well, but also illuminate and clarify our weaknesses that could be potential derailers. So the metaphor of a guide dog is the work that we do at a practical level of going into an organization, helping leaders to really understand and appreciate that a facet of emotional intelligence is a connecting between what they're doing and having an accurate rating and understanding that others also experience that same level and same magnitude of practices, whether it's recognition, whether it's delegation, whether it's setting goals together, whether it's providing and involving employees in problem solving, decision making and planning, leadership practices and behavior, as Gallup has suggested about a year ago, based on their very famous engagement survey, is the single most potent predictor. It accounts for the greatest variance in measuring employee engagement. So we may argue with the statistics, but I'm a firm believer that leaders make a difference dramatically in the retention and the high performance of talent. And also my work looks at how talent and employees today can flourish in environments with both psychological health and physical well-being.
And well, it's interesting you mentioned well-being. Well-being is also a hot topic right now. There's a lot of companies that are starting their well-being programs. Do you think the return on investment is there? Does it make sense? Does it make sense for companies to invest money in this area?
Well, it's a complicated topic because we would say, are happy employees more productive? Is satisfaction necessarily tied to output? And the answer simply is there's mixed reviews. So our goal is not just to translate the workforce into happy employees. And I'll define happiness as the ratio between positive and negative affect, of having more positive feelings compared to negative feelings. We would label that as a definition of happiness. We also know that having purpose and meaning is a secondary way of defining happiness. And today in the world of work, linking employees' signature strengths and skills with the tasks and objectives, the mission and vision of an organization, we know raises employees' psychological well-being, the sense of connectiveness. But we also find a return on investment from the lifestyle practices. And this is another area. It's not just an emphasis on happy workers, but it's healthy workers. And in fact, in the literature, we do find a pretty solid, if any intervention we can talk about in talent management, organizational development, leadership, we may actually find the strongest link between healthy employees that are getting adequate rest and sleep, that are eating and working out physically and able to manage stress. And in today's always-on climate, we're tethered to the tablets and smartphones and the telepressure we have today. The ability to leave work and to detach and find some recovery is a strong predictor of high performance. So simply, I think wellness as an arena has a strong ROI, and I would push more for that than just focusing on let's develop happy workers, let's develop healthy workers would be my argument.
Right, I mean, and some of those elements have a lot to do with the concept of positive leadership. You mentioned positive negative emotions. Barbara Fredrickson's work, of course, in that arena is very interesting.
Yeah, broaden and strengthen, yes.
Yeah, and of course the flow around, working on strengths. So, what would be the characteristics from your perspective of a positive leadership? I mean, who would you choose? Who would be your icon? Who would you look up to as saying that's a positive leader?
Well, I won't pick on a name or a label or a politician or a world leader, but I think the attributes that we continuously see are, again, those attributes that in an environment where there's not white water, there's not a crisis, we find more participative styles, more involvement-oriented leadership styles, where there's a balance between being held accountable for the task responsibilities, the bottom line, but simultaneously bringing elements of social and emotional competence. Our research and others is very clear that the presence of social and emotional intelligence, while favorable to measurement of performance and results, is only a necessary condition, but the absence of social and emotional competence might in fact be a stronger predictor of potential executive and leadership derailment. So we think this combination, it goes back to the old classic task versus relationship factors in organizational psychology 70, 80 years ago that have been talked about are true today. We're just using different language to describe
And of course you need to be flexible depending on the situation, etc. I mean, you have to be able to recognize the implications. It'd be great if you could mention a few companies that have been working on neuroscience and leadership as a concept, on neuroleadership, and what their experiences have been, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what are the key learnings.
Well, it's a new area, and like I say, there's a lot of, I'll say snake oil, there's a lot of BS that's being pushed by consultants and coaches and vendors, and again, to be concrete and specific about what do we mean about neuroscience applications in the world of work. So we've begun to do work with a wide variety of organizations. Paul Zak, for example, is working directly with Zappos in the United States.
Great company.
Has been experimenting, as you know, with teal type of non-leadership, and it's quite interesting because our thesis has always been leaders make a difference. So our work there has been looking at the culture of how teams work together. And what we're finding, of course, is one of the single best predictors of high performance teams. Google has also amplified this in their Project Aristotle, has little to do with skills and ability, little to do with cognitive ability, and more to do with what they labeled psychological safety, a euphemism for can I be candid with you, can I feel at ease. It's another code for can I trust you. So in our work, we're really believing again that the foundation for every team model we've ever explored and researched starts with the necessary condition of high trust. So in teams that we're working with at Zappos, we're beginning to experiment with the interpersonal or social exchanges, how we communicate with each other, teaching team members to recognize and tune into the emotions, the impact of their behavior, the guide dog analogy on how others are experiencing them is the single most potent way for enhancing both team morale, team challenge, and we're seeing the outputs actually being increased. So again, it's applied neuromanagement, but very narrowly and very specifically to what we know in the lab will facilitate pro-social, collaborative, and cooperative behavior.
Now, of course, Zappos is let's say, a digital company and a relatively new company. Any experience with older companies, with companies that have been around for more years and could be more conservative in their culture?
Yeah, we're beginning to do work in all different industries, and I don't think it's the maturity level of the organization. So whether they've been around for a long time or they're where we work on quite a number of entrepreneurial startups in the high-tech area that are actually very interested. They're small, they're nimble, their organization structure, the reward systems or feedback systems are very much in the new stages. They may be emulating other companies that have established systems. We actually find they're just as interested in looking at, again, practical neuro applications to the work that they do. Obviously, in a very competitive entrepreneurial startup, 70 to 80% of these companies may not even exist in 5 years. So we're starting to do work with equally startups as well as mature, broader organizations that have established structures and systems, policies, and procedures.